you just see there was just a cyber truck that went past my house? Did
Is
you
that
just?
what it was?
Yeah,
I just saw a blur, Billy. I just saw a blur.
I saw it in the computer. That's crazy. Oh, all right.
Waiting for like a nude guy or something, a nude lady or somebody to be running around out there, Billy.
I don't know who the hell would be in a cyber truck in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
I don't.
Maybe it was Elon, buddy. Looking for you.
Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or a loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I am your host with the most, Bill Rader, and joining me, my podcast partner, my partner in crime, literally, Sean Kane. Sean, how's it going, bud?
Billy Raids. I am pumped up for this episode. This was going to be a huge one, buddy. I did a ton of research on this. I've been looking at the archives of the library. I've been looking online and going through books, and just a ton of research went into this episode, Billy. So I'm fired up for this one, buddy.
And this one it really ties into a lot of the other episodes we've been doing lately, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think, Billy, this is our most important episode as far as, trying to tell the true history of organized crime in the United States and how everything ties together, Billy. This is going to be a little bit of an extension of the episode that's up now with Scott Alfieri, but this one, like you said, Bill, talks about everything that we tie together. And, this is the most important one we've done at this point.
All right. Well, you want to take a break? You want to do a quick break first and then get into it?
Yeah. We'll take a break, hit up some sponsors, and then we'll get right into it.
We will be right back. That's Enough Out of You is sponsored by Casa Quattro Winery, featuring over 20 flavors of wine, from dry red, dry white, and fruit for your sampling pleasure. Casa Quattro Winery offers entertainment, parties, and private events. Check out our full menu with a little something for everyone, including appetizers, salads, dinners, pizza, and desserts. Casa Quattro has some of the best live entertainment in the area, with comedy nights and karaoke night and live bands. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram for all of our upcoming events. If you mention the code OUTA, that's OUTTA, you get 15% off your order. Located at 1542 Main Street in Peckville, call 570-382-3855 for more information. And we thank Casa Quattro Winery for their support. All right, we are back. That's Enough Out of You. And Sean, let's get right to it.
So, Bill, how this episode really came about is, years ago, I was talking to an Italian friend of mine, and he was kind of kidding me that he says, how come the Italians get all the headlines and stuff? But he said, the Irish and the Jewish gangsters are just as much in there. And I thought about that, and there's so many infamous Irish and Jewish gangsters. So that's why we talked about the importance of that. So when I started to do the episode with Scott Alfieri, and we got into how the intelligence community uses Cosa Nostra kind of as a cover, I started to realize that if you study organized crime in America, obviously we talked about three important groups: the Irish, the Jewish, and the Italians. But if you look at it just from the Irish and Jewish standpoint, you see where the overworld connects to the underworld. And what I mean by that, Bill, is the unions, politics, law enforcement, legitimate businesses all connect. And this is you can only see that really if you look at it from the Irish and the Jewish standpoint. So what I started to do, Bill, is focus on one of the things Scott said is he said, how come everybody talks about the Appalachian meeting when the 1957, when they busted all these Italian gangsters in Cosa Nostra, basically. But he said there's no Irish and Jewish gangsters there. And it's interesting, Bill. Everybody talks about that meeting, but they don't talk about the 1929 Atlantic City Conference. And that to me is the most important organized crime event in the history, when you study the history of organized crime in America. And we're going to talk about that tonight. And when you look at two figures, Billy, when you talk about that, you got to talk about Owney Madden, and you got to talk about Nucky Johnson. Nucky Johnson was infamous in the show Boardwalk Empire by Steve Buscemi.
Right.
If you really look at who started organized crime, it's Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, and Owney Madden. But everybody talks about Lucky and Meyer. They kind of leave Owney Madden out of it. Owney Madden's kind of a shadow character, kind of erased from history, Billy. And even Lansky the last few years has been downplayed, where the media and historians say he wasn't as powerful as people made him out. He died broke, which none of that is true, Billy. And if you follow Lansky and you follow Owney Madden, it opens a whole other doors, Billy, to a lot of different things. So that's what we're going to focus on this episode. And we're going to drop some, I found some explosive information, Billy. And one of the things is I'm going to give you some of the researchers that I've been looking at. I'm going to give them credit because when I started to look at Owney Madden, I started to follow these Canadian journalists and authors, Bill. One of them was a lady by the name of Ellen Lawson, and another was an author by the name of Jason Vanderhill. And then they started to really get me on this path of what happened, Bill, is when I was studying Owney Madden, a character came across that these two guys really did a lot of research on. And his name was Daniel Joseph Kennedy. Okay. Now, he went by his middle name, Joseph Kennedy.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, Billy. He was a bootlegger, a businessman from upstate New York. He had connections into New England, into Boston, into Canada. And, it was first that I read that Ellen Lawson was the first one to say that she thinks that all this stuff about old man Kennedy being a bootlegger was actually this Daniel Joseph Kennedy. There's two different people, Bill. Daniel Joseph Kennedy was no relation to the Kennedys that we know, no relation to the Kennedys, totally different person. And Jim DiEugenio mentioned this before too. He mentioned Daniel Joseph Kennedy. And I think what happened, Bill, do you remember when we had Don McGovern on and he talked about Mark Shaw and what he did with the Bobby Kennedy stuff, where Bobby Kennedy was in Gilroy, California when Marilyn Monroe was killed 350 miles away.
Right.
And his alibi was a guy by the name of Bates.
Yeah.
And to offset that, Mark Shaw and some others kind of just switched out the resumes of Bates and a mob lawyer by the name of Frank Regano and just switched the people and say he can't be trusted because he was a mob lawyer.
Right.
Well, this is kind of what happened with Kennedy, Bill. And a lot of this that's attributed, all of it actually, that's attributed to old man Kennedy was actually this Daniel Joseph Kennedy. And he was a very important partner with Owney Madden and Meyer Lansky. Okay. Now, what he did, Bill, is he developed Kennedy's jazz cocktails and Kennedy's hat cocktails. And these drinks were produced in Canada and smuggled into the U.S. by a company named Joseph Kennedy Limited. Now, I've seen a lot of researchers, Bill, have that company owned by old man Kennedy. That's not correct. And I credit this Ellen Lawson, I credit this author, Jason Vanderhill. This is a company that was owned by Daniel Joseph Kennedy, not old man Kennedy. Okay? Old man Kennedy owned he founded a company called Somerset Limited. And he founded this company, Bill, a month before Prohibition ended because he was on to Prohibition's coming to an end. How do I take advantage of this? So when he founded this company after Prohibition ended, legally, he imported all of this alcohol in through this company that he set up a month before Prohibition ended. Totally legal, Bill. So he did like Jim Giorgino said this before, Old Man Kennedy made a ton of money after Prohibition, not before or during Prohibition. Okay.
Right.
So that's the important thing, Bill. There's Daniel Joseph Kennedy. He's the main guy with his company. He had a company based in Vancouver. There's I try to find pictures, Bill. There was one picture I found that in the library that was attributed to Joe Kennedy. It's Daniel Joseph Kennedy. So there's a lot of confusion with this. And Seymour Hersh, Bill, the Kennedy hater who wrote so many books on the Kennedys, bashing the Kennedys, he interviewed Owney Madden, and he interviewed Frank Costello, the Genovese gangster. And both of them told him that they were in the bootlegging business with Joe Kennedy. Now,
different Joe
Kennedy. They're not lying. Yeah, they're not lying. They were, but it wasn't the Joe Kennedy that we know. It was Daniel Joseph Kennedy.
Right.
So you see, Bill, like these people are either lazy or dishonest, or they just didn't know where to look, because a lot of this you can't find, Bill, unless you study organized crime through the lens of the Irish and the Jewish gangsters, and then you trace Owney Madden. Okay, so that's just explosive, Billy, of what happened. And I think a lot of this, goes back to the fact that Old Man Kennedy's reputation was ruined by this, and it was really this Daniel Joseph Kennedy. So just amazing find, Bill, amazing stuff. And I want to credit those Canadian researchers. And Jim has mentioned this before, but this is something that should really be out in the front lines, Billy. There's so many people in the mainstream attribute Old Man Kennedy to bootlegging.
Well, it's just easier. It's lazy. It's lazy reporting. And how much of that are we seeing today?
We're seeing a lot of it. We're seeing a lot of it. So I want to get into the Atlantic City Conference in 1929, but what I want to do, Billy, is I want to talk about Owney Madden, because he's such an important figure, Billy.
Yeah, who is he? Who is he?
Information about him. Well, he was born in 1891 in England, Billy, but he was born to Irish immigrants. His parents were Irish immigrants. Okay, so he's Irish ethnicity, but he was born in England, so he could kind of go between that WASP society and the Irish Catholic Society, and he's a very important figure because he becomes a powerhouse, Billy. So at age 21, the immigrant to America, to Hell's Kitchen, where later on the Westies will roam. And at the age of 21, he's leading the Gopher Gang. Okay, and you remember the Gopher Gang from Scorsese's movie Gangs of New York,
right?
And he's nicknamed the Killer at an early age because he was killing people right in the street, Bill. And he would say, "I'm Owney Madden, 10th Avenue, come get me." Like he killed people and let them know he did it. Which probably isn't smart, but that's how protected he was, confident he was that he controlled his neighborhood. And then, he forms an alliance, Billy, really doing Prohibition. He becomes a major bootlegger. And of course, who's his partners? Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky. Okay. And he also brings in people like D. Joseph Kennedy, not Old Man Kennedy.
Right.
He becomes a powerhouse, Billy. And this is where I'm going to talk about the Atlantic City Conference at the end, because I'm going to go over Owney Madden first. But he becomes a powerhouse in society, Billy, in New York society, where he gets into the boxing arena, where he's a powerhouse promoter in boxing, where he's actually fixing heavyweight fights, Billy. And it goes back to the Irish political machine in New York, Tammany Hall, which of course, the famous boss was Boss Tweed. That structure, Billy, allows Owney Madden to come in and take over. So he goes from this gangster from the streets to like a society powerhouse. And he buys the Cotton Club, Billy. And I'm sure you heard of the Cotton Club.
Of course.
And he buys that from the boxing heavyweight champ, Jack Johnson. And he becomes really close with Mayor Jimmy Walker, You know, he was the Irish mayor of New York that was defiant during Prohibition. He supposedly had secret tunnels with the alcohol in there. So Owney Madden becomes a very, very, very powerful society type gangster. Okay, where he has so many connections. Bill, he's so connected that Charles Lindbergh went to see him to see who kidnapped his baby. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the Lindbergh
Wow.
kidnapping and
Yeah,
everything.
of
He
course.
wanted Owney Madden to investigate that and find out what the heck happened. That's how
Wow.
connected he was. And his girlfriend, Owney Madden's girlfriend, one of them was the film actress Mae West. I'm sure you heard of Mae West.
Of course. Yeah. Wow. That's crazy.
So this guy's connected, Bill. This guy, so now you see where the overworld and the underworld is connected. Like he's a guy that could walk between both worlds.
Right.
See what I'm saying? And what happens is, we're going to talk more about this when we go to Atlantic City. What happens is when Luciano gets into a war with the Mustache Pete's, which is Maranzano, Masserina, the old school Italian mafiosa, Owney Madden gets into with some of his own guys, specifically Bad Doc Cole, and we'll talk about that later. But what happens is Owney Madden supposedly retires, Bill, and he goes to Hot Springs, Arkansas. Now, these guys never retire, Bill. You know that.
Right.
So you might be familiar with Hot Springs, Arkansas, because a famous politician who was later president came out of there, Bill Clinton.
Right.
Okay. Now, Owney Madden was long dead when Clinton's career went off, but the structure that Owney Madden is going to create in Hot Springs, Arkansas, would lead to Bill Clinton's political career. Because when he goes to Hot Springs, he creates an unbelievable political machine, Bill, where he basically controls the mayor down there, Leo McLaughlin. Okay. And he creates a resort down there for gangsters coming in and out. Like Luciano Lansky would be figures down there, any gangsters on the lam. But he creates a political powerhouse in Hot Springs, Arkansas, that's similar to Pendergast in Kansas City, similar to Tammany Hall in New York, in this Irish political machine that's controlling everything, Bill, from the local level to the state level to the federal level. Okay. And
What was it like? It was like a Camp David for gangsters. Is that what?
Well, the resort that he controlled was, yeah. And
Yeah,
he
that's
was
crazy.
controlling, legal activities from gambling to stuff in the town, but he's also controlling all the political aspects of it. And of course, law enforcement is very corrupt. It's a very, it's just similar to what TJ Pendergast is doing in Kansas City. But you're right, it's like a resort for gangsters on the run, Billy. So while I was investigating this, I found two more unbelievable pieces of information, Bill. So I mentioned Leo McLaughlin, the mayor. His son wrote a book on the resort, on the gangsters that were always there. And there's pictures there. There was, Lansky and Luciano were figures there constantly. And one of the things he wrote, and I checked the source to try to double check it and triple check it, and there was other sources too that said that there was many gangsters there, but most of them were New York gangsters, which makes sense because Owney Madden is a New York guy. But two gangsters that stood out that were there, that they couldn't explain why they were there, and it was two Chicago gangsters, Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli. When I read that, Billy, it stood off the page. It kind of reminded me of, remember the scene in Oliver's movie, JFK, where Kevin Costner goes, he's talking about Oswald's background, and he's like, it's kind of subtle as a cockroach crawling across a white rug. Like that's
Right.
what stood out to me. As soon as I seen Giancana and Roselli, I said, let me see what dates they were there. And they were there in 1959, 1960. And when the author said, I don't know what they were doing there then, what do you think was the first thing I'm thinking? Well, I know what Roselli and Giancana were doing in 59 and 60. They're working for the CIA to assassinate Fidel Castro.
Right.
So that's what stood out to me. Was Owney Madden a part of that? Now that's not enough. That's kind of a stretch to get there. We don't really know for sure, but it's something that's very interesting, Bill. And I'm trying to go down to really find Owney Madden's intelligence ties, because we know Luciano and Lansky had intelligence ties through Operation Underworld. So did Owney Madden have ties? I I found something connecting him to Bob Mayhew of the CIA, but I found out that that was false. So I'm not going to report that. So I'm not going to report something that I know is false. But it was reported in another by another author. But when I researched it, I found that that was incorrect. So I'm not saying he didn't have connections to Mayhew. I'm still looking down an avenue, but
Right.
I'm not going to report something that I know is false. So I'm still looking into that, but it's very interesting, Bill, that Giancana and Roselli would be there at that time period. And then I found another thing, Bill, through a lot of this research. These Canadian authors and journalists are tremendous, Billy. So you could give a shout out to your countrymen there, Canada. They're just
I'm
tremendous.
not Canadian, Sean. I
Well,
only
hockey, though. I know you like hockey, Bill. You always love when we bring up Canada. But one of the things that I found out that RFK, we talk about him a lot as being the greatest crime fighter this country ever seen. In his investigation, Bill, and I checked this through multiple sources, RFK's investigation into organized crime was in Hot Springs, Arkansas, was one of the focus of RFK's investigation. And that was a bombshell to me, Bill.
Yeah.
Because that's the first time I've ever heard that. Now, when I say he's investigating Hot Springs, Arkansas, he's investigating Owney Madden, Bill. There's no other reason to investigate.
Sure.
And then you know that RFK is also investigating Jimmy Hoffa, the Teamster Union, specifically going after the officials in the Teamsters. So it hit me, Bill. RFK is so smart. He understands that, yes, he could bring in, because remember, this is before the RICO statute. He can't get to the bosses of the commission, but he could bring in guys like front bosses like Giancana. He could go after like Carlos Marcello, Trafficante, guys like that, and bring them in and everything. But is that really going to damage the structure of organized crime? No. He was attacking the actual structure because he understood where the overworld and the underworld met and overlap, Billy. So what RFK is doing is he's attacking the structure of organized crime. So now this goes into the theory, Bill, that the people in the overworld, the very high level people, like an Allen Dulles, like a Rockefeller, those guys don't want their connection from the overworld to the underworld eliminated. So now you see what I'm saying? So RFK is becoming a major threat because of, and that makes his brother the threat because, he's the one, Bobby's the one investigating this, but John is approving all this, having Bobby go after this. So Bobby is attacking the structure of organized crime. He's not just, he sees it outside of Cosa Nostra. He's not just attacking Cosa Nostra. And that's what makes Bobby Kennedy, so impressive, where he had this vision where he could see this stuff, Billy. So Owney Madden, they say he retires to Arkansas. We know that's not true. He built a powerhouse down there, and he would die of natural causes, Bill, in 1965. But the structure that he created would carry on forever, Billy. Okay? And we're going to talk about the Atlantic City Conference and the importance of that. But I want to talk about a figure, Nucky Johnson, first before I get in Atlantic City. So is there anything, do you want to take another break, Bill? Hit up another sponsor?
Yeah, why don't we take a real quick break? We'll be right back. And we would like to thank our sponsor, Gracious Day Grains. Sean, you like to eat healthy, don't you?
Always, buddy. I try to eat healthy as much as I can.
Yeah, and there is nothing healthier than what they call like farm to table, right? So when you can get something right from the ground and make it and then put it right on your table. And Gracious Day Grains, they have a tremendous selection, and it's totally organic. Everything is, they don't use any sort of herbicides or pesticides or anything like that. They have a bunch of different products on their website, Gracious Day Grains. So if you go to graciousdaymilling.com, you'll find a bunch of great stuff there, Sean.
Yeah, you will, Billy. And it's owned by Tom Maxey, who's a great guy from Virginia. He's a truth seeker, just like me and you, buddy. And Tom's growing philosophy follows the wisdom of farmers of centuries past. And a quote from Tom is, "If we practice the right rotations, we exclude the bugs and weeds without needing herbicides or pesticides. So, I mean, this is great, Billy. I mean, what he's doing is fantastic.
There's cornbread mix, there's cornmeal, popcorn he sells, buckwheat Sean, have you had buckwheat pancakes?
No, buddy.
Oh my, they're delicious. I love buckwheat pancakes. And Gracious Day Grains sells buckwheat pancakes. Just go to their website and you'll be able to find all of this stuff there. You can order it right off the website. You can find out all about how they farm and their whole philosophy, Tom's philosophy. It's great stuff.
It really is, Billy. And one of the things he does is he grinds small batches at very low temperatures, which retains the flavor and the freshness. Of course.
And it can't get any fresher than that. I mean, it's literally right from the ground. So again, go to graciousdaymilling.com and just, take a look on there. You can order whatever you want and they'll send it right to your door. Again, it doesn't get any fresher than that, right from Tom's farm to your door to your table. So
absolutely. And eat healthy and you'll feel better.
Absolutely. I wish I could do that. I wish I could eat healthier, Sean.
We'll start with Tom's stuff, buddy.
I'm going to order some of those buckwheat pancakes. I love
There you go. I'm going to try them too, Billy.
Yeah, they're really good. All right. Gracious Day. We thank Gracious Day Grains for their sponsorship.
Thank you.
All right. We are back here on That's Enough Out of You. And Sean, you're going to get into, you're going to talk about Nucky Johnson now, right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about Nucky Johnson because he's going to be the host, Bill, of the Atlantic City Conference in 1929. Okay, now Nucky Johnson, of course, he's played by Steve Buscemi in Boardwalk Empire. Nucky Johnson was very much a figure like Owney Madden, Pendergast, Boss Tweed, and Tammany Hall, where he was that overlapping gangster politician. So he ran New Jersey, Bill, specifically Atlantic City, on the overworld and the underworld. He's the politician, but he's also running all the rackets, from prostitution to illegal gambling. And he creates Atlantic City. And, let's get some of the myths out of the way because Boardwalk Empire is not very realistic, Bill. If you're looking for accuracy, do not watch Boardwalk Empire and think it's an accurate detail.
Right.
One of the things that they got wrong was they portray Nucky as, first of all, they changed his name. I believe it was Nucky Thompson in the series. So that allows them to do a little leeway, but they didn't take a lot of leeway, Billy.
Right.
So one of the things is in the series, he's portrayed as an Irish Catholic. He was actually a Methodist. He was actually Scotch-Irish. So he's like similar to Owney Madden, where he could go between that WASP world and the Irish Catholic world. You know what I mean? There's also no evidence that Nucky actually killed anybody or ordered anybody killed. Now, you could make assumptions being the position he was in, but in the series, they took a lot of liberties with that, So, but there's no actual proof of that. But he did have a lot of control, the corruption, and the bootlegging. His major partners, of course, were Al Capone, Owney Madden, Meyer Lansky, Lucky Luciano. And he brings in a lot of tourism into Atlantic City, Bill. And he really, like I said before, he creates that. But he's the guy, Bill, if you're a senator, you're a governor in the state of New Jersey, you have to go through Nucky Johnson. He's controlling everything, similar to TJ Pendergast, Billy. Okay. And he's going to host this Atlantic City Conference. Now, in 1949, he's convicted of tax evasion. And he's paroled in 1945. He kind of hands over his empire to another Irishman, Frank Farley, who carries it on. And he kind of lives a quiet life the last few years of his life. And he dies a little bit after Owney Madden. He dies in 1968. But he was the leader of this political machine, Bill, that really controlled New Jersey. And it lasted long after he dies, So any questions, Bill, before we get on to the big one here, the Atlantic City Conference?
No questions. Let's keep going.
So 1929, to me is the most important conference. It's more important than the creation of the commission in 1931. It's more important than the Appalachian meeting of Cosa Nostra, because in 1929, the formation of the structure of organized crime that's really been laid out for 30, 40 years before is finalized and carried on at this conference. And every ethnic group is shut out of the conference, Bill, which is interesting, except for Irish, Jewish, Italian / Sicilian. They're the only ethnic groups allowed at this meeting, Bill. Okay. Now, there's pictures of people that were there, because the cover story was that they were all there to celebrate Meyer Lansky's wedding. Meyer Lansky just recently got married, and all these guys, because you have to explain why you got all these gangsters from all over the country.
Right.
There, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
Nucky was hosting Meyer Lansky's, wedding ceremony and in this celebration. So you have all these people from all over the country, but you have pictures. Some people confirmed there. There's speculation on who was actually there. We know Nucky was there, obviously. We know Owney Madden was there, because we could verify that with pictures. Meyer Lansky, Lucky Luciano. And those three would be the three main guys that would organize crime nationally, Bill. So it was laid out that Luciano would take care of the Italian Sicilians, Meyer would take care of the Jewish gangsters, and Owney would take care of the Irish. So going forward, Bill, if, let's say, when Bugsy Siegel gets into issues with Virginia Hill and Vegas and the casinos and the mob's losing money, Luciano goes to Lansky to take care of Siegel because he's Jewish. You understand? He's like, it's your problem. You got to handle him.
Yeah.
So, like, Lansky has to, even though Siegel's his longtime buddy, it's his job to take care of him and take him out. Same thing with Owney Madden when one of his guys, Mad Dot Cole, is kind of going rogue, and he's attacking other families, and he's really causing a lot of problems. And Luciano goes to Madden and says, you got to do something with Mad Dot Cole. You have to take him out. And that was one of the most brazen hits, Bill, because how Madden set it up is he got Mad Dot Cole on a payphone, and he's in the payphone booth, and he's talking to him, and he keeps him on the phone until the gunmen arrive, and they machine gun him with the Tommy guns, and they gun him down right in the streets, Bill, where there's tons of people there, but only Mad Dot Cole is hit. So it's almost like a perfect execution, so those are the guys we know were there, Billy. There's other guys that
reminds me of the Castellano hit, actually.
Similar.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Sean, as far as the way that, the conference and the way that how they set it up and everything, where is that documented? How do you know this?
How do I know this?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of pictures online, Billy, from various researchers. I know TJ English is an author that did a lot of the work. You could go back when I was at the library, Bill, I found a lot of documented evidence on different archives, different newspapers, New Jersey newspapers. Because remember, Bill, they were there to celebrate Lansky's wedding. We also know this from Joe Valachi. Joe Valachi, when he turned foreman, he talked a lot about this, about the formation and commission, and he mentioned this.
Okay.
But the thing is, Bill, a lot of the stuff about the Irish and the Jewish doesn't make it into the books, doesn't make it into the history books. Okay. But, there's a ton of documentation, Bill, and a lot of it's based on informants that were there, Billy, so that we know about.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, and like I said, there's so much documentation because they didn't even try to hide it, Bill, because it's not like Appalachian where they were hiding it and then it just blew up.
Right.
Because they had a great cover, Meyer Lansky's wedding.
Yeah. Okay.
There's pictures of the wedding. There's, so we could confirm a lot of people that were there. But one of the things that Meyer Lansky says that's very interesting at this conference, he says, who's going to take care of the Irish? Okay. And what was interesting about that is, Luciano already established, well, only Madden's taking care of him. But Meyer said, no, I mean the Irish. Because at that time, the Irish have already assimilated into society. And kind of like the Jewish people did too, Billy, where the Italians haven't yet. So the law enforcement, politics, legitimate business, unions were all controlled by the Irish. The Jewish were controlling legitimate businesses, garment industry, stuff like that. But New York Police Department, Bill, from the upper echelon, at one time, they were all Irish. So this is where the roles are established at this conference, where, the Irish have their role, Jewish have their role, and the Italian, Sicilians, and the different territories are established. And it's not just the 26 Cosa Nostra families, Bill, but it's also what would later be Winter Hill. And we'll talk about that a little down the road, which is the Irish mob that Whitey Bulger will take over. But that was established way before, like, you're going back to the 1800s. It really wasn't called Winter Hill until they started hanging out the Winter Hill Athletic Club.
Yeah.
That's a family that goes way, way back. So different things like that are established. Another one is Mickey Cohen, who had his own family, the Jewish family, mostly Jewish gangsters, okay? And another, of course, is Meyer Lansky, who really had his own family. And it ties in a lot to Israel, Billy. Ties into, like, Meyer Lansky spreads into so many different areas. So he covers an enormous empire, similar to Owney Madden, Bill. So this is why it's so important to look at, Meyer and Owney, not just look at Luciano. But it was 4 days in May of 1929, Bill. Let's see, I'm trying to see. We know Frank Costello was there. We know Vito Genovese was there. We know John Lazia was there, Bill. We talked about John Lazia, the Kansas City boss. Okay. And he was there with representatives of the Pendergast machine. Now, there's no verified pictures of TJ Pendergast that I found, that I was looking for, but I found reports in newspapers that said TJ was there. Okay. But I can't verify that with a picture. But I would say, my personal belief, studying TJ Pendergast a lot, he's not going to not be at this conference. He had to be there. Okay. And another thing is there was a group that was formed before this, Bill, called the Big Seven. Have you ever heard of the Big Seven?
No, I've never heard of the Big Seven.
Well, a lot of people attribute the Big Seven. They say that Old Man Kennedy was head of the Big Seven, which we know is not true because he wasn't even a member of it. One of the members was the Joe Kennedy, the other Joe Kennedy, a totally different person, Bill. Okay, and of course it was Owney Madden, Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, and Nucky Johnson. They were the Big Seven. So that formation, that group was actually, you could go to that group about 4 years before the conference. Okay, so we know all of those are in attendance. We know there was other gangsters like Danny Walsh of Providence who would tie into Winter Hill, what would become Winter Hill. Okay, we know Santo Trafficante Sr. was there, Bill, not the one we talk about that was working for the CIA, Santo Jr., that's his son. His father was there. We know Sly Carolla was there, who was Carlos Marcello's boss in New Orleans. Okay, some of the people that were locked out are interesting, Bill, because we know Masseria and Marizano were not there. We know Bugs Moran was not there. Now, why would those three specifically not be there? Well, because there's going to be a war. Okay, so Masseria and Marizano's not there because Luciano's planning on taking them out. Even though at the time they're probably the two biggest gangsters in New York, Italian gangsters, they weren't invited to this meeting. So that tells you, what's going to happen on the line where Luciano's going to take them out.
Right.
Bugs Moran's not there because this is shortly after the St. Valentine's Day massacre. And that's one of the things they wanted to discuss. Besides setting up the role, setting up the structure, they want to discuss with Capone about, the violence that's going on in Chicago. And then, it has to stop. And, one of the things that happens, Bill, is there was there was an incident between Al Capone and Nucky Johnson because all these guests were staying at the Atlantic City Breakers Hotel. Now, the Breakers Hotel was infamous for the elites, but the elites were mostly WASPs. So when all these guys come in, Irish looking guys, Italian looking guys, and they come in with phony names like Joe Jones or something like that. And the people at the hotel, they know they're not WASPs. So there's this big incident, and they try to stop these guys from checking in. And then Nucky gets called. He goes down to the hotel and he straightens it all out. But Al Capone is hopping mad because Al Capone was one of the guys that the front desk harassed and wouldn't let him check in. So Al Capone gets in this infamous screaming match with Nucky Johnson that reporters picked up on, Bill. So that was an interesting thing that happened there. So let me see. So they talk about the future.
Question, though.
Go ahead, Billy.
And I this would probably just be speculation, but we know that these guys were tied into legitimate business, probably Wall Street also.
Yeah.
So this conference takes place in May of 29.
May of 29, yeah.
5 months later, what happens?
Yeah.
Wall Street crash.
The crash, yeah.
Stock market crash in 1929. Yeah. It sends the country into the Great Depression. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, just trying to think about why would that benefit them? Obviously.
Well, they could have dumped all their holdings if they knew it was coming.
True.
You know what I mean? I mean, you're speculating, Bill. I mean, that's something I haven't looked into as much.
Yeah.
And I haven't really heard it, but that's interesting that you bring that up because we know the Rockefellers were involved with that.
Right.
So I mean, it's possible. Like, there's still layers though, of the overworld and the underworld, where like you're not going to see a Rockefeller at one of these meetings, Bill.
Right.
Okay. So I mean, was there a connection there with that? That's a great question, Bill. That's a great question, but certainly a guy like D. Joseph Kennedy, Nucky Johnson, Owney Madden, somebody like that could have an impact of that. I mean, that's possible, Bill. Another thing about Owney Madden that I forgot to mention, Bill, when I was looking into why would Giancana and Rosselli be there, and I found that Owney Madden had investments with Meyer Lansky and Santo Trafficante Jr. in the casinos in Cuba.
And you're talking 30 years later, Sean, not
30 years later. But I wanted to point that out now because I mentioned earlier why Giancana would be in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
Right.
So that's something that I forgot to mention that I want to mention now. Madden had investments into Cuba. So that could be a reason he was talking to them guys. Okay. But sure. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something, Billy, that I'd like to look into. The stock market crash. That's a great question, buddy.
Yeah, it just seems an awful coincidence that all of these things were happening at the same time.
Well, the thing is, Bill, we don't know exactly, a lot of this is high level, Bill. So low level guys aren't going to know a lot that's going on here.
Right.
A lot of these guys, you're talking about the cream of the crop as far as gangsters across the country that are at this meeting, Bill. Albert Anastasia was there. Lefty Buckholter was there. Dutch Schultz was there. I think did I mention Frank Wallace of Boston?
I don't think you did.
Okay, he was an important gangster.
But the point is, Sean, this is not insignificant. I mean, this is one of the biggest
events
probably the biggest event in the history of organized crime.
And it's not covered much.
Right. But also what I'm saying is 5 months later, all of a sudden,
that's a great, yeah.
It's just, it seems like an awful crazy coincidence. But
you also have to figure a guy like TJ Pendergast, Billy, he would be able to play a role in that the stock, right? Now there's speculation on our part, but I'm just saying he was that type of guy that had that connection to the overworld.
Yeah.
And so did Owney Madden, Bill. So did Owney Madden. Owney Madden had many friends on Wall Street, Billy.
Yeah.
You know, he could walk into a room, Billy, and talk to the mayor, you know, talk to guys on Wall Street. Like he could sit down with CEOs, Billy, and he could also sit down with hardcore gangsters like Luciano and Al Capone and Bugs Moran and guys like that, you know.
And these guys did really well during that time period too. I mean, it's not like they were
Unbelievably well.
impacted by the Depression. They were making money hand over fist.
Yeah. Yeah, depressions and stock market crashes, stuff like that, but that don't affect organized crime. There's always they're immune to that stuff, you know.
Exactly. So,
but one of the things I should also lay out there that I forgot about Owney Madden is when he goes to Arkansas, okay, he leaves New York, his crime family that's in New York still exists. So a guy by the name of Huey Mulligan takes that over. And he would run with that, and then eventually hand it to Mickey Spillane, who we talked about. Mickey Spillane would get into the war with the Westies, which would take over Hell's Kitchen, and also Roy DeMeo, the Gambino family, and Fat Tony Salerno, the Genovese family. Right. So that his New York family, Owney Madden, would still be there and still being run, and Huey Mulligan would be a fixture going down to Arkansas to consult with Owney. So is Owney still running New York? Possibly. You know, he's such a key player, Bill, and such an important figure. But yeah, this conference, Bill, was such an important, it really ties into everything. And then when you find out that, you know, RFK understood how a figure like Owney Madden is so important, then you really, you know, understand that this is bigger than even Cosa Nostra, Billy.
Yeah. And you just wonder, Sean, again, we always come back to this, but what if JFK was never assassinated? You know, how much sooner do you think organized crime would have been taken down, you know, or at least severely handicapped because of Bobby and the work he was doing?
Well, this is an eye-opener for me, Bill, when I realized that Bobby understood that attacking, like, it's similar to what Bobby understands. I can't go after my brother's killers later on until I'm president. Once he's president, then he could go after them. He understands that attacking, you know, trying to get a Sam Giancana off the streets and somebody like that isn't really going to put a damper on the entire system. You have to get rid of the structure. So you have to get rid of people like Owney Madden. You have to get rid of people like Jimmy Hoffa and his corruption in the unions. You have to get these people out of legitimate businesses. And the only way to do that is to attack the structure. And Bobby understood that. So to answer your question, I think if JFK did live and then Bobby would take over, right? Yeah, I think definitely you would have organized crime. And maybe this ties into the whole thing. You know, that's another reason why JFK had to be taken out. And it's not, people focus too much on Cosa Nostra, Billy. They focus on the stuff now that we know the mob didn't fix the election, right? That that whole thing's been debunked. Right. And we also know that, you know, we talked to you earlier, old man Kennedy was not a bootlegger. It was this D. Joseph Kennedy, a totally different person.
Right.
So the mob would have no reason, that type of motive, but they would have a motive because he's going after the structure. But again, Bill.
Sure, but they didn't have the means or the opportunity.
They didn't have the means. You can't, the mob can't get into the autopsy room. The mob can't change the parade route. We talked about this. The government's not going to hold records for 60 years because the mob did it. Even though I think they're going to try to blame the mob. But the thing is, yeah, there's no way they could have did it. But I think it's important to understand how RFK was going after that structure, Billy.
Sure.
You know? So there's one more. You want to take one more break, Billy?
Let's take one quick break and then we'll come back. What's the topic you're going to hit next?
We're going to talk about New England, Bill.
All right.
We're going to talk a little bit about New England because this was set up there at the Atlantic City conference, and it leads to an understanding of how the patriarchal family Winter Hill operate.
All right. So we'll take a quick break. We'll come right back. We will be right back. DK's Corner, now located at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania, is serving up the area's best tasting food at respectable prices. Known for our great cheesesteaks, DK's also has delicious breakfast sandwiches, specialty coffees, and catering 7 days a week. You'll love the wraps, soups, and pizza too. We're now open Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Visit DK's Corner on Facebook to see our daily specials, and make sure to follow and like us while you're there. We offer local delivery to homes and businesses, takeout, or come and dine in our new restaurant in Jessup. Call or text DK's Corner at 570-209-0278 or hit us up on DoorDash. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. All right, we are back. And That's Enough Out of You. And Sean, we've been talking about the Atlantic City Conference in 1929. Now you're going to talk about the impact that it had in New England, that region.
I am. But before that, Bill, I want to put one thing out there. I mentioned a couple of people that weren't at this conference. Bugs Moran was one of them. Of course, the North Side Irish gangster who was fighting with Capone, and a couple different reasons. Because, he was on the run after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. But also, I think Luciano didn't want him there, because I think Luciano tipped Bugs Moran that Capone was going to have him whacked. And that's why Moran didn't go in that warehouse, and his eyes got wiped out. But because he got a phone call right before those gangsters dressed as cops went in and committed the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Right. So that was the reason why I think he wasn't there. But one of the other impacts, Bill, is we talked about these guys, Fatty Walsh and Frank Wallace, and these New England gangsters that were at the Atlantic City Conference. And what was established was the territories. So it would be Rhode Island would specifically go to the Cosa Nostra family, which would later be taken over by Raymond Patriarca Sr. But they would always have a relationship with the Irish mob there that became Winter Hill. Okay, so let's talk about that for just a little bit. Raymond Patriarca, born in 1908. He left school when he was 8 years old, Bill, to shine shoes because he had to support the family.
Wow.
Really poor, yeah. And what happens, Bill, is he starts hanging around with these mob guys in Providence, Federal Hill specifically. And by the time he's 14, Bill, wait to hear this rap sheet. He's charged with hijacking, armed robbery, assault, safe cracking, and auto theft. That's by the time he's 14 years old, Bill.
Oh, wow.
So,
That's crazy.
Yeah. So then he's brought into the Patriarca family, would become his name, but he's brought into the New England Cosa Nostra family, and he's a made guy. He takes over the family, and he develops a relationship, Bill, with what would be called Winter Hill. Now, like I said earlier, they go back to late 1800s, but it's not till a guy by the name of Buddy McLean takes over in the late 40s, who owned the Winter Hill Athletic Club in Somerville, Mass. Okay, and that's where they got the name Winter Hill Gang. But they were established well before that. And then, this would lead to a war between Buddy McLean and a crew in Charleston, Massachusetts, which the movie The Town took place there, the McLaughlin crew. And it would be a violent war, and Patriarca would get involved, and he would help Buddy McLean. Buddy McLean is killed, and a gangster by the name of Howie Winter takes over. Now, Howie Winter is an interesting guy, Bill, because he would be in and out of jail. He would Bulger would eventually take over while he's in jail. But he would get out, and he would be in his 90s, Bill, when he gets out, and he's still running rackets. And I think it was like he was 93 when he got arrested for some kind of real estate scam he was running.
Wow.
Yeah, so he was a hardcore gangster. But one of the things that Winter Hill did that ties into the national structure is they developed this horse racing scheme up and down the East Coast, okay, at racetracks. And when they would go into an area like Pocono Downs, which is near us in Wilkes-Barre, they would deal with the Buffalino crime family, the Cosa Nostra family.
Sure.
So they would pay them for operating in their territory. So Winter Hill would actually operate kind of like a Cosa Nostra family, Bill. Like they're like the 27th family when you think about it, the way they're operating.
Right.
And they're so connected to Patriarca. And what happens to old man Patriarca is 1970, he has an Irish gangster by the name of John Red Kelly who was working for him, and he turns a foreman. Okay, and he did hits for Patriarca, and he testifies against him, and Patriarca would die in a prison, a heart attack, in 1984 at age 76. And then that would lead to Cadillac Frank Salemi would take over, which is interesting, Bill, because at that point, Cosa Nostra had changed the rules where you didn't have to be 100% Italian or Sicilian to be a made guy. You just had to be 100% on your dad's side. So Cadillac Frank Salemi was actually half Italian, half Irish on his mom's side. He was completely, so this is why he's able to connect to the Winter Hill guys too, because they're mostly Irish. So he has a great relationship with Whitey Bulger and continues that partnership that Patriarca has. But you can see, Bill, that it was all established at the Atlantic City Conference in 1929 when these territories are divided out. You know, so Pendergast, Lazio, and the Pendergast family, like everything is connected here, and it's connected through, you know, the Irish, Jewish, and Italian gangsters. They lock everybody out. So there was other ethnic gangs through the years, like the Chinese triads and the Japanese Yakuza,
Right.
even the Russian Bratva, you know, and they're all locked out, Billy. And this is where the structure is, you know, where the overworld, the underworld connect. And that's why I think, you know, the Atlantic City Conference is the most important event in the history of studying organized crime. And I think there's still more to do, Bill. I think I'm on a path here with Owney Madden that I still want to look into a lot more. I think I want to look into a lot more on this Daniel Joseph Kennedy, because I think a lot more.
Yeah.
The dishonesty, Bill, of people who, you know, kind of just switched the whole character, made him into Old Man Kennedy.
Right.
You know, it's kind of like, so it's either laziness, it's dishonesty, or it's they just didn't know where to look, Bill, and they just heard Joe Kennedy.
Yeah.
Oh, it goes like Seymour Hirsch. I mean, technically, Owney Madden and Frank Costello didn't lie to him. They said we were in the bootlegging business with Joe Kennedy.
Right.
We're just not that Joe Kennedy.
Yeah.
You know. So,
interesting. Wow. This is really
good.
A
lot of new information, but a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I know a lot of people probably, you know, never heard that before about the other Joe Kennedy. They probably never heard about Owney Madden.
Right. Most people probably don't even know about that 1929 conference.
Probably not. Probably not. And we'll post some pictures, Bill. There's some pictures online you can post of, you know, the conference, because like I said, it was under the cover of Meyer Lansky's wedding.
Sure.
You know, so there's a lot of pictures of the guys on the boardwalk.
Yeah.
You know, different things, and walking by and they just say, hey, we're just celebrating a wedding.
Sure. Yep.
The real importance of being there was to establish the structure of organized crime, establish roles. Okay, where Italians for the most part would run the streets. The Jewish guys would run legitimate businesses, like they would be able to go in the casinos, Bill, like you see with Lefty Rosenthal in Vegas.
Yeah.
You know, and the Irish would run the politics, the unions, because you look at the Teamsters, Bill, everybody assumes Jimmy Hoffa is Italian. Jimmy Hoffa, I don't know where that comes from. Jimmy Hoffa was German-Irish, and his whole Teamster crew was Irish. Frankie the Irish Spearin, Chucky Bryan, Frank Fitzsimmons, even later Roy Williams, who we talked about with Lazio and Pendergast in the Kansas City, he was Scotch-Irish. So it's I don't know where that comes, but the roles were established. And then, you know, they really came down on Capone as far as the violence, got to cut the violence out. And then it's interesting, Bill, it's not too long after that Al Capone goes away for tax evasion. And this is where the Cosa Nostra takes over Chicago and becomes the alpha. And Tony Accordo would take over and really run Chicago for 50 years. Yeah. So you have to wonder, Bill, was Capone set up to take a fall? That's another thing that you have to. Yeah. Because Luciano's planning this, Bill. He's planning out the entire structure, right? So you see what he's doing. He doesn't have Masseria Marizano at this meeting. Doesn't have Bugs Moran at this meeting. there's certain guys that were locked out, and there was other guys too that were locked out that would later be hit. Okay, so the guys that they were going to whack to kind of set the structure, they're not invited to this meeting.
Yeah, interesting.
Marzano and Masseria should have been, because they were the two biggest Italian. They were as big as Luciano.
Yeah.
So they should have been invited. They weren't.
Right. Interesting. Wow.
So a lot of information, Bill. It's going to make head spins, but we'll talk back on this.
Yeah, definitely. If you have any questions, for Sean, make sure you put them in the comments. Make sure you like and subscribe, all of that stuff, and check out our Patreon, because there's always updates that we're making to stuff like this on our Patreon. So go to Patreon. That's enough out of you, and you can join there. We do an extra show every week on Patreon. We do we call it our speakeasy. So make sure you sign up. $1 gets you in the door. $1 gets you the speakeasy, the extra show.
And Bill, there's another thing I want to mention, a reference that I used, a book called The English Godfather on Owney Madden.
Yeah.
Because remember, he was technically from Liverpool, England, but he was Irish. He was Irish ethnicity. But that was a good book that explained a lot. So I used that. I used a lot of Canadian newspapers, Bill. And these authors, this Ellen Lawson and Jason Vanderhill, who wrote a book on D. Joe Kennedy. So we should probably do a review on that whole book, Billy. I'm going to try to get a hold of that book.
Yeah.
I have some experts of it, but I want to get through, and read the whole thing and then get back on that, because he's a character that needs more examination, Billy.
Sounds like it. Yeah, for sure. All right, Sean. Well, this was great. Really good stuff. And we thank everybody for listening. And we'll see you next time. That's enough out of you. That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane, and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.